Professor Kwadwo Appiagyei-Atua of the School of Law, University of Ghana. Recently, he wrote an article on declaration of a state of emergency after students of that university, students of international law, human rights law of the University of Ghana School of Law held a press conference. That was sometime in July or so, asking that the president should declare a state of emergency. In May or November thereabouts in 2022, Occupy Ghana was the very first to moot the idea of a state of emergency. We have come how many years? And the president or the government doesn't seem to want to think about that at all. Prof, thanks for joining us. Prof, please unmute your mic. Hello, Prof.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Good.
Hello, Sam.
Right. So a declaration of a state of emergency. Help us to understand what that exactly means. Article 31 of the Constitution says the president may, acting in accordance with the advice of the Council of State, by proclamation published in the Gazette, declare that a state of emergency exists in Ghana or in any part of Ghana for the purposes of the provisions of this Constitution. If the president does the declaration, then the Constitution requires that within 72 hours, he must notify Parliament, so Parliament will confirm it. If he doesn't do that, then it will lapse. The Constitution says the state of emergency shall cease to have effect at the expiration of a period of 7 days, beginning with the date of the publication of the declaration, unless before the expiration of that period, it is approved by resolution passed for that purpose by a majority of all the members of Parliament. What is this thing? What does it mean?
Thank you. Well, first of all, before we talk about state of emergency, we need to talk about human rights itself, because human rights, state of emergency calls for suspension or limiting the enjoyment of human rights in order to achieve a particular purpose. So human beings are entitled to enjoy human rights. They are inherent in us, they are inalienable. And we enjoy rights to be able to enable us live, first of all, as human beings, and to enable us to attain development and so on. Now, when we enjoy these rights, we stand in a place of being the rights holders. And on the other side of it, we have the state as the duty bearers. And as duty bearers, there's a threefold duty on the state, which is, first is to respect the enjoyment of these rights. In other words, the state is not supposed to do anything that will interfere in the enjoyment of our rights. Second duty is to protect the individuals in the state from third parties interfering in the enjoyment of their rights. And the third one is to fulfill, that is to put in place certain amenities and resources to enable human beings to enjoy their rights. Now, there comes a time when certain situations may arise, which creates a conflict between the rights that we enjoy and the agency needed to resolve certain problems which have emerged in the society, which by way of ordinary practice, the everyday practice, the state, it doesn't have the capacity to resolve that problem. So it calls for derogation or suspension of some rights so that the state can properly perform this function. And when the problem is overcome, then the rights which were suspended or derogated from by the state will be restored and life will continue as normal. Now, because of the fact that states have the capacity to abuse rights, certain structures need to be put in place before a state of emergency can be declared. And so first of all, we have to ask ourselves, or the first condition to be met is, what is the problem that has arisen, which is so overwhelming that the state cannot use the usual structures and procedures to perform its obligation of ensuring that life goes on as normal. And this condition, we can have a situation, for example, a natural disaster, or where there is a particular problem which poses an existential threat to the state, as we have sought to describe the Galamsey issue. So when that situation arises, then it means that the state can call for derogation of a state of emergency. And during this period, it means that certain rights can be suspended. And it's not all rights. We as human beings, we don't enjoy absolute rights. We on our own, some rights are limited in their enjoyment so that others can also enjoy their rights. But when the state of emergency is declared, certain rights are derogated from. So if you look at Article 4.1 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it talks about certain rights like freedom of religion, freedom from slavery, and others which cannot be derogated from even during periods of emergency, including the right to life. So when the state meets these conditions, then it can call for a state of emergency. And like I said, a state of emergency cannot be permanent. That is why I recall in the case that we brought before the Supreme Court, the imposition of the COVID-19 law which the government made, Imposition of Restrictions Act. The Supreme Court held that there is no sunset clause which should limit the enjoyment of those rights. And on those grounds, they declared that the law should be declared as null and void, and it should be repealed. And so when we go to
Okay, so Prof's line is freezing a bit. Yeah, let's try.
I've come to the conclusion that looking at it, and as you rightly said, months to deal with that issue. And so what it means then is that we were calling on the government to do that, follow some procedures which you rightly read from the Constitution. And so that is what it is about. And state of emergency is not declared necessarily over the whole country for it to work. It can be limited to particular areas where
yes, the Constitution says so.
About exists. Yes. So in this case, the call for the declaration is not countrywide, but only the Galamsey Ravi.
Okay, Prof, your line is disappointing us a bit. I don't know what we can do about that immediately, because I need you to take us to what exactly that means, what goes into it. No, Prof's line, we need to get Prof back. Let me try again.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. What happens when a state of emergency is declared? What difference will it bring to the fight?
Thank you. Yes, I think the difference it will bring to the fight, and you rightly mentioned what will happen when a state of emergency is declared. The declaration of a curfew, enhanced surveillance, and so on, which are all going to limit the enjoyment of certain rights, which, as I said, forms part of the process of declaring a state of emergency, or when a state of emergency is in place. Now, these measures are supposed to, first of all, target to enable the government to identify those engaging in legal mining, whether small scale or big scale, and then those who are doing the Galamsey, so that when that mapping is done and they're able to identify who is doing what. Because the thing is that some mining companies doing legal mining are also doing illegal mining activities, and some are involving these Galamseyers to do some of the dirty job for them as well. So we need to be able to make sure that you identify those engaged in proper mining, legal mining activities, and those who are not.
Okay.
And that is part of the emergency measures, which will ensure that we are able to, having identified where these hotspots are or the red zones are, then we can, the police, with the support of the army, can go to these spots and make sure that the people are arrested and the necessary stringent measures are put in place.
In a minute, tell me,
these
Prof,
practices.
Prof, in a minute, tell me why you think the government is hesitant in declaring a state of emergency, which runs through the calls and the demands by many organizations that issued a statement. We had over 50 groups issuing statements.
The Galamsey practice.
Yes, go ahead.
The government is hesitant to do so because the Galamsey practice is backed by, or it involves, campaign financiers. We are in the campaign season at this time, and at this moment, the campaign financiers are moving from one political party to the other, especially the NDC and MPP, and negotiating and renegotiating and doing horse trading with them. So the fear is that if they lose the backing of these financiers, they are going to lose in the elections. It is not so much about the Galamseyers, the small boys and those some of these
small fishes,
ladies working in the pits. They don't have much power in terms of even how many votes they have. But it's the political financiers that are really engineering this hesitancy on the part of government to attack the issue as we want the government to attack it through the position of the state of emergency, because they are afraid that they will lose the support of these financiers.
Okay.
And this is where it becomes a transnational organized crime.
Okay. The organized labor,
some of these financiers are outside the country.
Okay. Organized labor
has become networked and connected in such a way that they are not able to control them. And so Galamsey is a means for these financiers to reap back some of the profit or the money they put into financing these political parties. That is why on both sides, both the NPP and NDC, they are unwilling to commit to the Galamsey fight. So in my view, all that they have done so far, the government trying to ramp up attacks and so on, is just mere
Prof, I have a final question. I have a final question for you. Can you hear me, Prof? Hello, Prof.
We are not going to reap the benefits.
Hello, Prof.
But through the state of emergency, and we make them to sign that pact, which I think will be binding legally, then we can make a headway. Otherwise, if we sit and the elections are held, and these campaign financiers are able to have their way to finance these political parties, and they come to power, whichever of them comes to power, they will have to make sure that they pay back. And they are going to pay back through taking Galamsey to a higher level.
Thank you.
Where we'll move from being
Thank you, Professor Kwadwo Appiagyei-Atua is a professor at the University of Ghana School of Law.